Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
If it doesn't gel, it isn't aspic, and this ain't gelling.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, the world's greatest horror movie podcast. In this episode, my weird dad will be talking about...
Hi, Virginia. Hi.
Poor Virginia. Just when the rich young snobs at Crawford High condescended to come to her birthday party, they're all being murdered in the most bizarre ways imaginable. Happy birthday to me. Pray you're not invited.
Rated R, now playing at a theater near you.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Why Do I Hate Slashers? I Don't Actually sub-series of Wake Up Heavy Recollections of Horror. This is Mark Bigley, your host, and today I will be discussing J. Lee Thompson's 1981 film, Happy Birthday to Me. As I have mentioned with many of these slasher films, they could be Why Didn't I Rent This episodes, which is sort of why I'm doing this, and I really don't know why I'd never rented this video. The box art and the poster is now iconic and was at the time one of the more interesting covers that you could come across. It is entirely possible that I saw this and just have zero recollection of it, but that would be pretty unusual for me. There is one movie I can think of that I honestly thought I had never seen. As I sat through it, got about midway through, and there was one particular scene that gave me that deja vu feeling. It wasn't even really a memory. It was just like, boy, this feels awfully familiar. And then a little while later, there was a scene that I definitely remembered. It was a scene that had stuck in my head for a very long time, in particular to this certain actor. And I'm being vague because I'm going to talk about this film in a little bit, sometime before the end of the year. That's really the only time I honestly can say that I have had that happen, where I had no memory of seeing the film until I started watching it. So anyway, I didn't have that feeling at all the first time I watched Happy Birthday to Me a couple years ago. And it's not an unforgettable film by any stretch of the imagination, so I doubt that I rented it at any point back then. This is, much like the movies I decided to do for Why Didn't I Rent This, a film that I think I would have liked a lot if I had rented it back then, because it has that weird, not quite American feel. This was a Canuxploitation film, one of those numerous horror movies that came out in the 70s and 80s that was produced in Canada to take advantage of the tax credit and the tax shelter money involved with all of that. But it is supposed to be in America. It is supposed to take place somewhere on the East Coast. So you get a little bit of the accents. There is a either a French or French-Canadian actor in the film who has a very strong accent, and then you get some of the other abouts and sorries and things like that. But there are quite a few American actors in there as well, so it doesn't get it's not like My Bloody Valentine where it's heavy throughout. Speaking of My Bloody Valentine, Andre Link, who produced that film, also produced this, and he was the producer on 2 early David Cronenberg films, Rabbit and Shivers, and he also produced Meatballs. J. Lee Thompson, the director, though, is British, and he had been working since the early to mid-1950s, did everything from crime thrillers to musicals to comedies to westerns. And then in the 70s and 80s, he had a string of really interesting films, a lot of which I had seen back then and have watched these days. But some of his more famous titles are Cape Fear, the original Cape Fear, Eye of the Devil, which is an interesting satanic cult film with David Niven and Sharon Tate. He did Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, big Planet of the Apes fan as a kid. A movie that I mentioned recently, I think regarding my watch list, The Reincarnation of Peter Proud, and a ton of Charles Bronson flicks in the late 70s and 80s. In particular, one of the sleaziest Bronson films, 10 to Midnight, which is a favorite of mine that I remember watching as a kid on TV and then seeing recently and just being kind of blown away about how sleazy it is. If you ever want to see Charles Bronson wield a large dildo, this is the movie for you. The film stars Melissa Sue Anderson, who I had a huge crush on as a kid because she was on Little House on the Prairie. She was in the TV movie Midnight Offering, so she had dipped her toe in horror a couple of times. Her psychiatrist is played by Glen Ford, who had been acting since the late 30s. Was in a bunch of film noir westerns, Asphalt Jungle, and in the wacko 1979 film The Visitor. Before I get too deep into the cast list, I want to read the entry in the Psychotronic Encyclopedia film as my summary. Happy birthday to me, 1981, Columbia, Canada. Producers, John Dunning and Andre Link. Director, J. Lee Thompson. Screenwriters, John Saxton, Peter Jobin, Timothy Bond. The most shocking thing about this film was the poster. A young man screaming with a shish kebab skewer shoved down his throat. The star is Melissa Sue Anderson, Little House on the Prairie, a college student in New England whose preppy friends, all members of the Top 10 Club, keep dying in various unusual ways. Melissa, who had brain surgery after an accident, thinks she might be the killer. Glen Ford is her psychiatrist. Except for the graphic surgery scene, it's not as gory as some similar movies, but has more plot twists and other surprises. Rated R. And just a note for this episode, I'm going to spoil this film. I tried to keep away from that on these shorter sub-series episodes, like Why Didn't I Rent This and this one and maybe the Spotlight episodes. But the end of the film and how it was changed is kind of integral to the discussion of the movie. So if you don't want it to be spoiled and you haven't watched it, track it down and then come back and listen to this episode after you've seen the film. If you don't care, then just keep on listening. Along with a very seasoned director, we have actors and actresses that had been in a number of films already and would go on to have long careers. Lawrence Dane, who plays Melissa Sue Anderson's father, had been acting for quite a while. He is a Canadian actor. He has been in a couple of my favorite horror films, Rituals and Scanners, and one that's not my favorite but is pretty fun, the Killer Rat film of unknown origin. Leslie Donaldson had been in Funeral Home, Deadly Eyes, and Curtains. Sharon Acker, who plays Melissa Sue Anderson's mother, was in Point Blank and had appeared on episodes of Star Trek, the original series, and, you guessed it, Murder, She Wrote. Tracy Bregman. Now, she is one, other than Melissa Sue Anderson, she is the most familiar actress in the film for me. And as I was looking through her credits, I thought, well, there aren't a lot of movies here that I would have seen, or even TV shows. She was mainly is a soap opera actress and has been on The Bold and the Beautiful and The Young and the Restless. And then I thought, oh, that's why I know her. I watched The Young and the Restless in the early 90s because I had a girlfriend who watched it, so we all know how that goes. Matt Craven is in the film. He has been in a gazillion things. You will recognize him. When I think of him, I think of Jacob's Ladder. Lisa Langlois was in Phobia, Class of 1984, and Murder, She Wrote. And the writer, or one of the writers, the original writer, John Saxton, also wrote the Class of 1984. So we have, again, a lot of these Canadian actors, actresses, writers, and producers kind of crossing over on a number of these Canucksploitation films. A lot of the actors had been in something called The Littlest Hobo. I kept seeing that pop up as I was scanning their IMDb credits, and quite a few of them were in Meatballs. Along with that off-kilter feeling that it being a Canadian production provides, the first time I watched this, I was very confused as to the age of these kids, whether they were in college or in high school, and what exactly was going on. So I don't know if I have a feeling that a lot of this comes from that Canadian aspect of the movie. It's just slightly different than, say, American high school. And of course, as in most of these films, almost all of the actors and actresses are way too old to be seniors in a high school, which is what they're supposed to be, as I caught on this viewing recently. And they go to a prestigious, I want to say, prep school somewhere in New England called the Crawford Academy. And they all wear these stupid scarves because of that. But the opening scene takes place in a bar, and they're all drinking. Again, I don't know the drinking age of every state in America or what it would have been in the early 80s, but I think I had it in my head the very first time I watched this that they were college students, but the way the school was run and the sport events that they show and things like that just didn't jive with that. So they are in high school, and they are the elite of the elite. This group of friends, they call themselves the top 10, and I guess you have to be super rich and super snobby to be in it. And that is important to the movie itself, but it is something that absolutely drives me bananas. These people are assholes, and we all know how I feel about asshole characters. They are prone to playing practical jokes, and in that opening bar scene, one of them brings a rat. They put it in somebody's beer. It clears out the place. They play a game of chicken over an opening bridge. They are cheaters, and I mean that in competition, in school, personally, with each other's boyfriends and girlfriends. They're not very nice to each other. They're constantly bickering and arguing, and it's a perfect portrayal of this kind of kid. I went to school with these kinds of kids, and I absolutely loathe them. So I do, even though that bothers me in movies, and it's the aspect of the film that I dislike the most, I have to give the writers credit for kind of nailing this group to perfection. Melissa Sue Anderson's character, Virginia, or Ginny as she is called, is new to the group. She has only been at the school for a year, and they kind of imply that she's lucky to be included in the top 10. So there's that aspect of peer pressure and not belonging, and maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome going on with her, and that informs her character throughout the film. One of the members of the Top 10 Club, Bernadette, is murdered very early on. She is on her way to the bar where they're all meeting up to drink and hang out. And this early scene sets up the mystery of the movie, which is where things end up getting funky towards the end. So we have a whodunit, and we have our list of suspects, all of our red herrings lined up, and then at some point that's ditched. And then at the very end of the film, that's ditched again, and we'll get into all that. This is a whodunit, so there are misleading clues throughout. The killer, and I don't know if they did this on purpose, but at times it looks like it is a male, and other times it looks like it's a female. And I just mean their body size and shape and their movement. And it's a good device to use and has been used in other films, but it ends up conflating the whole thing by the end of the film. I mentioned this on one other episode, I don't remember which one now, where with mysteries or with Jolly, you should be able to go back and figure it out, and you can't really here. So I was paying attention to that a lot because much has been made about the end of the film and how it was changed. And so I was trying to be cognizant of the fact if this could actually work the way they set it up at the end. And while I was watching it, while I was making note of the kill scenes and where people were in relation to the main action in the scene, it doesn't really work. Like Arbogast says to Norman Bates,
If it doesn't gel, it isn't aspic, and this ain't gelling.
So throughout the film, most of the top 10 club members are pegged as suspects, either by us, the viewers, or by other people in the film. We have Anne, who is Jenny's best friend. And at one point, after they play this game of chicken, which is something they apparently do all the time, they call it the game, there's a bridge over a river that goes up when boats cross, and they have an order that their cars can go over it, and if the last person doesn't do it, they lose. I don't know what they get kicked out of the group or whatever. And so in this first scene, after they get kicked out of the bar, they do this, and it elicits a response from Jenny that we don't quite understand yet, and she runs off. And as she runs off, her friend Anne kind of glares after her. When Jenny runs off from the game of chicken, she is followed by Etienne, the French foreign exchange student, and she makes a little stop at the cemetery, which is apparently right behind her house, and clears off the tombstone of her mother and has a little conversation with her. We find out Etienne is spying on her. He stalks her, makes some advances, and she goes home in a huff. He ends up sneaking into her room and stealing a pair of her panties, which he shows to her later. Class A move, guy. Alfred, who is the nerd, quote-unquote, of the group, he's the oddball, the one that gets picked on the most other than Jenny. He is shown wearing an army jacket throughout the film, and when Bernadette is killed early on, and I don't think I'm misremembering it, it's quite possible I am, we see the sleeve of an army jacket. But that's not even the most damning evidence against Alfred. At one point, Anne and Jenny go to his room or his dorm. They find the head of Bernadette, and a little bit of spoilers here. It's the actress's head, the old head in a tray gag where her body is underneath of a cutout. You can even see her eyes move a few times. And he comes in, they're freaked out. They think he has killed Bernadette, but it is apparently a mask that he made of her at some point. He pulls some fake eyeballs out, and this is just a hobby of his along with taxidermy. At one point, we see Rudy, who is kind of hopping between girls. He is hitting on Jenny at different times. One of the other girls is supposedly his girlfriend. But we see him burying a scarf in a flower bed. And then he acts really strangely in the bell tower with Jenny and pulls out a knife. And then we have a hard cut and we see blood coming from the bell tower when one of the priests goes to pull on it. and we assume that one or the other of them is dead, and it ends up being a total red herring because both of them are fine, but apparently Jenny blacked out. It's a very confusing scene, but and then Jenny herself is set up to be one of the suspects because she has had this traumatic injury. She has had brain surgery and is seeing a psychiatrist because she has repressed memories about the death of her mother. Eventually, we learn that her mother and she were in an accident on that same bridge that they played chicken on, and their car ended up in the water. The mother died. Jenny got out, was hit by a boat, yet survived. And she's going through went through experimental brain surgery. And there's mention of a process that this doctor had discovered based on how lizards and reptiles can regenerate limbs. And so he somehow can regenerate body parts and internal organs. So we've got a little bit of pseudoscience going along with this. So Jenny suffers from these repressed memories and from blackouts. So she starts to wonder if she is killing off all of her friends during these blackouts. And the scenes where Jenny flashes back to her surgeries and her recovery are the most stylistic of the film. We get this red light, and then the camera goes into a large spotlight, and then we see the surgery that was mentioned in the Psychotronic Encyclopedia film, which is pretty graphic and very realistic. And then we start to slowly get the flashbacks to the accident, this big repressed memory, which is kind of strange to me because it's just an accident. They fall into the river and the mom drowns. And why no one else would be able to tell her that's what happened, I don't understand. I think it has to do with what leads up to the accident. It's sort of what sets off the finale of the film. So before I spoil the end of the movie and get into the logistics of all that, I wanted to talk about the deaths in the film because they were promoted as 6 of the most bizarre murders you will ever see. Now, other than the shish kebab kill, they're not really that unusual. One guy gets his Crawford Academy scarf thrown into the back tire of a motorcycle and gets strangled that way. One of them gets crushed by a barbell, which is a pretty good murder set piece. And there's a number of throat slashings and stabbings. So again, not all that strange. What happens during many of the kills, though, is that we see the figure from the neck down. And other than that initial one with the army jacket, the killer is generally dressed in all black. A black sweater, black pants, and white tennis shoes for some reason. And again, smallish frame. Looks like in many scenes it's probably a woman. But we get that thing that I always hate in these movies where the person that's about to get killed looks up and says, "Oh, it's you," instead of calling out the person by name, which would be the normal thing that a person would do in that case. So we get a few instances of that. We run through our red herrings as those people start to die off. The list narrows. And eventually, as I mentioned early on, that is totally tossed aside. And we see Jenny killing people. At one point towards the end of the film, Alfred approaches her at the cemetery again, and it is set up. He's wearing black gloves and has the army jacket on. He's reaching into his pocket. Jenny hops up, stabs him with garden shears, which is what she uses to clear off the grave of her mom. And so, mystery solved. We see her kill her psychiatrist at a later time. And this is, I love this scene. She gets him with a fireplace poker and hits him once on the head. And I swear to God, this room is just absolutely bathed in blood after this. So again, like many of these films, I'm sure there are some frames missing from this, and we have a much more violent kill than what's shown. But yeah, there is blood everywhere on her, on the room, on the carpet. So even though the kills themselves aren't that gory, there are some scenes with considerable blood flow. And here's where we learn what led up to this accident that killed her mom. And it had to do with, and again, it's sketchy on the time frame here, because at some point Jenny mentions that she was at the school 4 years earlier, but no one remembers her. I am assuming that this flashback is supposed to take place at that time, although she does not look any younger. And she had a birthday party and invited all of these kids from the top 10, and nobody showed up. Apparently Anne, her quote-unquote best friend these days, was having a party as well, and they all went there. The mom has been drinking. She gets furious, and they drive over to Anne's house where the groundskeeper or whoever this old guy is won't let her in, and so on and so forth, and then they have the accident. It's implied that there is some relationship between Jenny's mom and Anne's dad, and there's also this whole thing about now they're rich. Now Jenny's family is rich, and they should be at this party. If everybody else is there, they should be there. This whole big social thing. So now it seems obvious that Jenny is exacting revenge because this social structure, this idea of popularity and elitism, is what drove her mom to act this way and caused the accident. And so she is killing off all of the members of the top 10 club. Great. Got it figured out. And apparently that is what the original ending was supposed to be. I think there was some talk of Jenny being possessed by the spirit of her mom, but I think it was more of a revenge thing. Maybe that was part of the script, which actually seems sort of silly as opposed to just straight out revenge and her having blackouts and not really remembering this, and that's why she's killing them. Great. That's not what we end up with, though. They decided that didn't have enough oomph, and so they changed the end, although they didn't really change much of what had previously happened in the film, and they just kind of retconned their own story here with the explanation from the real killer. So what leads up to that, this ending, the finale, is Jenny's dad has gone out of town like he often does. This is another thing with the mom, that the dad is absent all the time, but the daughter apparently loves him more. And so he's gone. Anne comes over. Jenny thinks that she finds her body in the bathtub, assumes that she is killing everybody off. Psychiatrist comes over and says, no, that's not what's happening. She whacks him to death, then disappears for a while. And Dad, who had been away on a business trip, comes home, sees the bloody mess in the upstairs bedroom, tries to find Jenny, goes out to the cemetery and discovers that his wife's grave has been dug up. He discovers the psychiatrist's body and then realizes that there is a light on in the guest house. When he gets there, he finds the bodies of the top 10 club all seated around a table, and Jenny comes out with a lit birthday cake, singing "Happy Birthday to Me" to herself. So again, we're still thinking it's Jenny. She ends up killing her dad, and then she lifts up the head of a conspicuous figure at the table who has been head down this whole time. And wait, it's Jenny. So the first time I saw this, I thought, oh, that's fucking brilliant. It's twins. I love this kind of stuff. I love repressed memory stuff. I love whodunits, whether they pan out correctly or not. And I love twins, doppelgangers, and all that stuff. And so I was totally into it at this point. And it made sense. She could slip in and out. You wouldn't know who was who. Well, a twin wouldn't really make sense as far as the story goes, unless they had laid the groundwork for that twin living in the guest house or something strange like that. But as far as the logistics of the film, it works more than what we get at the end here. But this Jenny, seated at the table, reaches up and grabs the face of the other Jenny, and lo and behold, it's a latex mask. and underneath is her best friend, Anne. We learn that Anne and Jenny are half-sisters. Jenny's mom and Anne's father had an affair. Because of the affair, Anne's mother left. She never forgave her father or Jenny's mother, and so she is the one that is exacting revenge. And so, like I said, as I was watching this and knowing that it would be Anne, trying to figure out if it worked, and there were too many scenes where we see Anne and Jenny in the same area, in different clothes, and so I was saying bullshit the whole time while I was watching it. Well, Anne lays out this wonderfully brilliant explanation as to how she did it, and I won't get into all that because it's pretty fun. They do try to cover the bases. Of course, the mask was supplied by Alfred, who had a thing for Jenny. I don't think that they mention whether Jenny actually sat for a casting, which would have been necessary to make such a perfect mask of her face, but,
If it doesn't gel, it isn't aspic, and this ain't gelling.
I do appreciate that they go through the trouble of Anne's explanation and actually show it visually. It helps to cover any of those logistical blind spots that I was thinking had happened in my head. Whether it still could technically work as well as she said, I don't know. I'd have to go back and watch it again, which I will be doing eventually. But it's a lot of fun. I don't mind the ending here being a little suspect. I appreciate the fact that it's a little bit nutty and that it is not just a twin that no one knew about, although that's awesome, or that it's simply Jenny exacting revenge because of her mother's death and these repressed memories. So I give them credit for that. Now, this is a movie that I ended up buying on Blu-ray, and I'm happy I did because after I saw it the first time, it disappeared off of whatever streaming site I caught it on. I think it was on Shudder for a while. But it is pretty fun, and it is well made. We had a veteran director here. We've got good actors and actresses and a decent script, and since it kind of goes off the rails at the end there, that just elevates it a little bit higher. And much like My Bloody Valentine, and I don't know if this is a Canadian thing or what, but this movie ends with a theme song as well, which we will play out with at the end of the episode. If I had one complaint, I would say it's a scotch too long. I think it's an hour and 50 minutes or so, and I am not one of those people that won't watch a 3-hour movie. We hear this a lot. Dr. Sleep is long. The Irishman is 3.5 hours, blah, 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 all this stuff. I don't mind long movies as long as they keep my interest. This could probably lose maybe 10 minutes of extra stuff. All right, I think that does it for J. Lee Thompson's Conexploitation classic, Happy Birthday to Me. The next and possibly final Why Do I Hate Slashers I Don't Actually episode will be on The Burning, which tied with Happy Birthday to Me on the latest polls. I opted to break that tie since I had bought the Blu-ray for Happy Birthday to Me, and The Burning is streaming somewhere currently. I will be getting back to Why Didn't I Rent This with the movie that I alluded to earlier that actually has some connection to Happy Birthday to Me. It is also a Canadian film, but there's some other stuff going on as well. And whether or not either of those will get recorded and put out next week, I'm not sure. It is Thanksgiving next week, and my daughter has the whole week off, so I'm not sure what the schedule is like here at home, but I may not have the free time or ability to put out an episode before Thanksgiving. If not, reach back into the archives, catch some episodes you've missed, and play those on your long drives or plane rides to wherever it is you happen to be traveling, and travel safely if you are doing so for Thanksgiving. Coming up, the heavy watch list. Since last we met, I watched The Big Combo, a film noir from 1955, and that was prompted by an episode of the Projection Booth podcast. I watched Mortuary, which is a movie I had been wanting to see for a while. I remember this VHS cover from back in the day, and I have to say, other than an early quirky performance from Bill Paxton, there is not a lot to say about this movie, except it stars Christopher and Linda Day George, who I discussed on the episode for Pieces. I did a rewatch of Escape from New York because that popped back up on Amazon Prime, so get to it because it is an awesome, awesome movie. And then I watched a couple of those Hulu Into the Dark episodes. They're movies, but it's a series, and it started, I think, at the end of 2017, and they take a holiday or something revolving around that month and base the film on that. So I watched Uncanny Annie, and I'm not sure what that was, I guess Halloween, and then Pilgrim, which, of course, has to do with Thanksgiving. And these are all very hit and miss as far as this series goes, and Pilgrim was a load of crap. I just about shut it off, but I made it all the way through. The next movie that I tried to watch, though, Darlin', which just popped up on Hulu, and I think maybe on Tubi as well, I stopped about 20 or 25 minutes in and just could not finish it. I rewatched The Summer of '84 on Shudder. Ooh, another one that I have been trying to watch for a long time is Ruby,
That doesn't sound right.
Starring Piper Laurie from Carrie fame. Rewatched The Lost Boys, rewatched Blowout, and then watched something I had seen a bunch of talk about a few months ago on Twitter, Exterminators of the Year 3000, which is basically I think Spanish or Italian Mad Max ripoff, which I don't think I enjoyed as a lot of the people that had been talking about it on Twitter. I watched Vigilante, which is a Death Wish-esque film from 1983, directed by William Lustig of Maniac fame and starring Robert Forster, who recently passed away. I quite enjoyed this one, actually. And then, because of another episode of the Projection Booth podcast, I finally watched The Brain That Wouldn't Die. And then I watched, oh boy, this was a rough one. This is a movie that I saw, I don't know how many years ago, sometime in my late teens or early 20s, but it's a movie that I had heard about for years, starring Diane Keaton, called Looking for Mr. Goodbar. And of course, as a kid, I always thought about the candy bar, Mr. Goodbar, and wondered why in the world this woman was so interested in chocolates and peanuts. But this is a rough one. This is one of those super dark, really dreary ending films from the late 70s with an amazing performance by Diane Keaton, and it will most likely never get a Blu-ray release because it features a bunch of disco songs at the beginning of the film and throughout, and that kind of stuff can really foul up releases when those rights weren't secured early on. And of course, who would think that far ahead to things like Blu-ray and DVD? I watched a little rape revenge movie called Act of Vengeance, aka Rape Squad, from 1974. That actually was pretty timely and not exploitative as I was kind of expecting it to be. And it featured a hockey masked killer years before Jason Voorhees. And the last film on my list is Sisters of Death, which co-starred Joe Tata, who was the Peach Pit owner on Beverly Hills 90210. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving season, and I will see you soon. Don't forget,
anything can happen when you wake up heavy.
opens presents with pretty bows. Who likes party clothes? I don't need them now. Can't I dim the lights? Can't I cut the cake? A wish is just a wish. What difference does it make? Now that everyone's gathered here, sing out loud and clear, cheerful as can be. Happy birthday to me. Can't I dim the lights? Can't I cut the cake? A wish is just a wish. What difference does it make? Now that everyone's gathered here, sing out loud and clear, cheerful as can be.